Hello and welcome to the third and last episode of the Election Explained, the podcast mini-series from Edge Hill University all about the general election 2024. I'm Gareth Roberts and again I am joined by our experts.
My name is Paula Keaveney. I'm a senior lecturer in politics at Edge Hill University.
I'm Dr. Ben Williams. I'm an associate tutor in politics and social sciences at the university as well.
Brilliant stuff. So in episode 3, we are episode 3, sorry, and if you've missed the first 2 episodes, do check those out. Take a look too at our Election Explained articles on the Edge Hill website. This time around, we're going to have a look at how the elections unfolded in the media so far. We'll also answer some more of the questions that have been submitted to us by staff and students at Edge Hill and are in our special sweet jar. As we record, it's the day after the night before in terms of another major TV event involving the leaders of the Conservative and Labour parties, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Now, these debates can feel really important as they make lots of headlines, they're referenced on radio and TV, they're all over online media, social media and beyond. But Paula, are they that important? The first one in this country was in 2010, relatively recent. It's not got the history here as in America, where it goes back to the 60s.
Yeah, so there's no law that says we have to have these debates. And it was in 2010 when they actually started, although up to then, various politicians have been challenging each other to debates. But it's 2010 when it became more of an official thing. And the first one was very interesting because the representative of the third party, that's Nick Clegg from the Liberal Democrats, actually did the best. Now, this was predictable in a sense, but this fed into a lot of media headlines and poll findings saying, oh, the Lib Dems, they're coming top. Now, Nick Clegg did not become Prime Minister. And while this did actually give him a lift in publicity, the debates themselves, I would argue, didn't make the difference. They may have been good entertainment. You know, we may have found out something about those people, but they didn't really make the difference. And that's because when you have an election, quite often you already have a sense of how you're going to vote based on the few years previously, and there's a much more complicated campaign going on. So these debates are sort of snapshots in time, which some of us enjoy and I personally hate, but they don't move the dial in the way that I think a lot of journalists think they do.
Yeah, Ben, we talked there about a little bit of history, and, you know, there was a 1960 presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, which drew audiences of 60 million in America. And I think, you know, from there on in, there's been a debate in this country about whether we should have them. Labour leader Harold Wilson challenged Alec Douglas home to a debate in 1964. He refused. Wilson then refused to debate Heath. And then there's a long history of someone proposing a debate, another leader turning it down. It's tended to be, you know, the one that's in the front is challenged by the one behind and that kind of thing. But now, since 2010, it seems to have become this regular thing. Would you say, though, that, you know, that first one was watched by 9.9 million people on ITV, more than Coronation Street, more than EastEnders at the time? The figures this time, they seem to be dropping off. People are less interested. I've watched them, and I don't know what your take is on them. I think they feel incredibly scripted now, and that you're perhaps not getting some of the snippets of personality which you might have been tuning in for in the past.
Yeah, I mean, when they first began, I think there was certainly a novelty value for them, that, you know, they were new. And I do remember myself in 2010, they were really interesting. There were people saying they were going to stop watching their usual programme to watch the debate, and it did generate a lot of interest. As Paula said, it gave Nick Clegg in particular a boost in his profile. As time's gone on, you know, as in lots of things, it's almost like a television series that's been around too long. People have kind of got used to it, switch off slightly, don't pay as much attention. I think a lot of the clips pop up on social media. I don't think social media was as maybe big in 2010 as it is now. So people pick up snippets rather than see the whole thing. And yeah, I think you're right. I think, you know, the example being that when Keir Starmer again mentioned his dad being a toolmaker, there was a groan from the audience, but there were certainly scripted lines from both of the leaders that they use in other situations as well. They both seem to want to mention their parents a lot, with their parental background. They've obviously been told things to say, and I suppose voters are going to get quite cynical of these quotes and these quips that don't really get to the heart of the issues. And I think there was a bit of frustration in some of the commentary I saw from certain journalists on Twitter that they didn't think either leader was really answering the questions.
Yeah, it does feel like sometimes crowbarred messages are being put in no matter what the question is almost. There are 2 more to come as we record. We're not too sure when this will be out there, but there is one more debate on, there's a debate on 20th of June, BBC One, leaders of the 4 biggest political parties, and then the 26th of June, another one, BBC One, Sunak and Starmer. The Electoral Reform Society earlier this month, they talked about some of the focus of this, and they did say that they'd found young people had engaged with it and it had influenced them. So you might hate it, Paula, but it seems it is influencing someone somewhere.
Well, I think influence is a strong thing to say. Young people may well have watched it and may have found, some of it amusing and some of it not. But to then go on and say that it's influencing them, I think you would need a lot of research to back that up. I mean, certainly, Ben's point about the diminishing audience figures is an important one. The other thing that we tend to forget is that at the moment, the formats are negotiated between the broadcasters and the political parties. So there's almost a sort of triangular sense of people having power about how things are set up. And, there are some arguments that if we're going to have debates, perhaps there should be an independent commission that agrees what the format should be and the frequency. And back in the day, Sky Television actually organised a petition saying, we need to have this commission so that there is some sort of neutral control over this, because clearly parties negotiating with broadcasters will go for their own advantage. And perhaps as voters, what we want to see is something that's a bit more neutrally organised.
Yeah, that seems a very, very fair point. Ben, you mentioned the toolmaker stuff. Also in the most recent debate, there's a lot of talk now about Rishi Sunak eating Haribo and Twixes. These things don't really seem to be the things we should be talking about in the run-up to a general election. So, my question is there too much focus in the media and then the conversation that follows because of that about individuals? It doesn't really matter. Like Sunak and Starmer really shouldn't be the focus, should they? We're voting for a government, we're voting for policies, we're voting for, a future way of life almost, and yet there's this focus on sweets and what someone's dad did. And in the past we've had, Ed Miliband can't eat a bacon butty and, these kind of things. As someone who's passionate about politics, does that annoy you? Do you think the focus is wrong?
I think it's just the way of the world, really. I think we mentioned in previous episodes of these podcasts that we are living in presidential times. Although we're not a presidential system, there's been texts written by certain academics calling it the British presidency now, where we focus on the individual more so, and I think that's being made worse by 24-hour television, social media, internet. It's just the trend that's happened, whether you like it or not. Yes, it probably is wrong, because there's obviously far more to these elections than these individuals who in various ways are both quite flawed, the 2 main leaders. And there's a lot more to their parties than just those 2. But the media for some time now have focused on leaders, and polling does suggest that leader role is important. So if we go back to 2019, we probably had 2 more colourful characters running for Prime Minister, and both had their supporters and both had their critics. But I think when it came to the crunch, that most people saw Boris Johnson as the more credible, better leader than Jeremy Corbyn, although events since maybe have questioned Boris Johnson's performance as Prime Minister. But certainly the leader, when they're a particularly colourful leader or a bland leader, does have an impact on voters, polling would suggest.
And this is an important point, I think, Paula, bringing it back to we're hoping, praying that we've got young listeners and watchers to this. Could you explain about parliamentary parties v constituency v branch? Because that's very important, isn't it?
Yeah, so political parties are divided up locally. So some of them will have a branch, which is people living in a particular local government ward or a combination of wards. They will also be organised on a constituency level. So that is all the party members living in that parliamentary constituency. So they're all members. And each constituency elects an MP. And then when they get to Parliament, the MPs for one party will be in that parliamentary grouping, the MPs for another party will be in that parliamentary grouping, and they will meet as sort of party colleagues fairly frequently. So, you know, up to this point, the Conservative Party, generally their meeting is called the 1922 Committee to complicate things even further. There is the Parliamentary Labour Party, there is the Parliamentary Liberal Democrats, who will meet roughly weekly to agree what they're going to do in the next week's votes, to discuss other issues. So it can be quite complicated. And it is possible to be a member of a party but not in your parliamentary group. And that tends to happen when they withdraw the whip. Withdrawing the whip is like saying, OK, you've done something bad, or there's an issue with you. You can't be in our parliamentary club anymore. You can't be in our gang. So although you may still be a member of the party nationally, you've got to sit on your own.
See, that's all fascinating. That's stuff I don't even understand there. But I mean, I guess the basic point there, and you made it in one of the other podcasts as well, is we can get wrapped up in Starmer, Sunak, Farage, whatever, leaders, but you're voting for someone to represent you in your area, aren't you, first and foremost?
You are, and this, if we look at the candidates standing this time, there will be a lot of new MPs. You know, whichever party comes out top, there will be a lot of new MPs. And so some constituencies will be represented by someone where it's their first time in Parliament, and you know, that brings its own challenge. But, you know, when we vote, it is for a representative for our area. If our representative and all the others in the same party add up to the majority, then that will become the governing party. But we can't vote for the government. What we're voting for is our local MP.
And just another one on the TV debate, and then we'll move on to something else, Ben. The leaders in the ITV debate were given 45 seconds to answer questions. Now, again, was that something that you maybe looked at and thought, how can you reduce something so big to something so small?
Well, yeah, and obviously that was quite difficult for them. But, I mean, they obviously had to be concise and get their message across. But they've got that much to say, that to whittle it down to that short amount was obviously very difficult. I mean, I think personally that debate for me, the first one, was not as interesting or as sort of newsworthy as the one we've just seen on Sky, which was, as we said before, was a different format. So there they had questions from the presenter, then questions from the audience, and they didn't have that kind of limitation in the sense that they had in that one. And I think that's why it's quite important that the way these debates are structured going forward are very important to sort of have some kind of system in place. But certainly a very short speech like that is going to create difficulties and doesn't really give a fair or clear, you know, summary of what they're going to stand for.
And that brings on quite nicely, actually, in terms of a summary of what they stand for. Tell us about manifestos.
Oh, so a manifesto is like a sales brochure. So in the run-up to an election, parties will publish these manifestos. So they're saying, if we get in, this is what we're going to do. You know, on health, on crime, on the economy, on education, this is what we're going to do. So they're a sales brochure. But they're also very risky because sometimes the situation changes. Sometimes there's an emergency and parties may find they can't do everything they said they would do. So when people write manifestos, they have to be quite careful about exactly what they're saying and how they're phrasing it. Because if you get elected and then you do something in contradiction to your manifesto, this causes a massive problem for you. So party planners are trying to avoid this sort of situation, while at the same time having enough in the sales brochure to sell it. So if it was for a car, you can't get away with saying it's got a roof and 4 wheels and a steering wheel. You have to say more than that. But if you then went on to say, and it's always black, you know, and then you made one that was red, you would have difficulties. So it's finding the balance between the level of specificity that you need and not saying too much.
Would that be something you'd look at Ben, at all, would that be something you'd study at all? You know, good and bad manifestos of the past, maybe?
Certainly at certain levels of research, you get to a certain level of academia. I've certainly read articles and publications where, people have trawled through manifestos looking for evidence for policy making that's then developed, or like policy making that hasn't developed. Because as Paula said, it's kind of like, a pledge to the voters to deliver. And then if you don't deliver on something in the manifesto, you can be questioned. In the same way, if you produce something that's not in your manifesto, then you're open to further questioning. But yeah, I mean, at an academic level, there are people, who are sad enough, but are paid for it. They'll trawl through them looking for like evidence, trends, policy origins to then write further about.
Okay, well, that's what a manifesto is then. Let's go to the sweet jar. The questions from staff and students here at Edge Hill. Give them a bit of a shake around. Go on, Paula, you go first.
So let's get that one. See what this is. What would you say to those who don't vote because all politicians are the same? So all politicians are the same is in quote marks here. Well, firstly, I don't believe all politicians are the same. So even looking around the politicians that we see regularly, they're really different, aren't they? Different in character, different in approach, different in ideology. So they're not all the same. But probably somebody who says that is not going to believe me just saying they're not all the same. So I would then say, OK, let's have a look at some examples of politicians who've done very different things. So, you could find somebody who is supporting a particular issue and talk about what they've done, and then another politician who's opposing it. So evidence that they're not all the same. But also, this question is about reasons for not voting. And I would always want to say, well, do you not want to have a say on things? Do you not care about your local area or the government or the way the country is run? Because if you don't vote, you are not having a say. And we all moan, we all say, oh, they should do something about this, it's terrible. And the they, in this case, is the government, it's the politicians. So if we want them to do something about it, we need to have our say to say, please, yes, we need you to do something about it.
And it's much easier now, isn't it, than ever before, really, to find out exactly what individuals do, what they have done. You've got the internet there, it's easy to go and research someone and see what they've done. So,
there are websites which will tell you how politicians have been in Parliament and voted on a range of issues.
That they work for us.
Yeah, there are websites that have examples of political leaflets. So you can look and see all the latest political leaflets. You can say who's saying what. And if you look at who's saying what, you'll see great differences in some of the things that parties are saying. It is very easy now to find out where particular people, particular parties are coming from. And I will say, if you're not clear and you know who the candidates are, just follow them on Twitter. Just, find out the names of the candidates in your area, follow them on Twitter. That's the easiest way of seeing who's saying what about what. Because even if somebody is not talking about an issue, that tells you something. If there are 5 candidates and only 4 of them are talking about housing, that tells you something about the 5th. So that information is useful.
Absolutely. OK, Ben, your go.
Okay, go. That's what I'm going to say. What does purdah mean? And what does it mean when Parliament dissolves before an election? Oh, that's a slightly tricky one. So again, my understanding of the purdah is a period then when basically the government stops being run by the government, by the elected politicians. And there's a period where they can't be party political. So there's a period now, is it, where all the candidates, I think, are no longer MPs. They are just candidates. They're not allowed to put out kind of information in their role as MPs. I think the government has to be careful, the civil service has to be careful not to get involved in party political matters. So there's a period there where neutrality, I think, really kicks in, so to ensure a fair election for people taking part. When Parliament dissolves, well, literally, the parliamentary chamber conclude its business. I think this time around, Sunak caught quite a lot of people off guard. I don't think people were expecting Parliament to end when it did. And I did watch some of the footage on television, and there was a hurried closure of business. Bills had to be finalised. Some bills were dropped because there wasn't enough time to get them through. And then it was quite an emotional day, actually. Sadly, I think I must have been bored. I was actually watching this. There was a day of departing MPs, giving their farewell speeches, and that was a moment that they wanted to sort of pay tribute, thank people for their support over the years. And so the dissolution of Parliament is literally when that parliamentary session comes to an end. And in this instance, happened fairly quickly because all of that business has to be finished, finalised, closed off before the election campaign then is kicked in. And a new Parliament will obviously meet after this general election at the start of July.
A little add-on to that, Paula, what happens, Ben mentioned it there, what happens to some of those bills that we expected to go through, people have worked hard on, campaigned for, whatever it might be, what happens to those now?
So there's a period called the wash-up where, you know, they rush some through, and some did get rushed through, but the others, they've fallen, you know. So if the Parliament wants to have those bills, that it will need to start again, you know. So it is heartbreaking if it's a bill that you personally have invested a lot of emotion in, that it stops, but it stops because this will be a new Parliament, and one Parliament can't bind the hands of the Parliament that's coming up. And unfortunately, this is always the way with deadlines that appear out of the blue. You know, I was a great supporter of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act because at least when we had a law that said this is when the election has to be, unless there are other circs, you could plan much better. And the sense with this quick dissolution I get is, let's say you're studying for an exam. The exam is in 4 weeks' time. You're planning your revision, and then I turn around and say, oh, sorry, I'm doing it next week. You know, it felt a bit like that. There's a lot of your revision that you'd have to drop.
Well, I was just going to add to that. There are some bills, I suppose, in draft format now, which are probably non-controversial, which would probably get cross-party support, which whoever wins the election could, in theory, bring the bill back, and it would kind of already be there as a way to just start the process again, going through Parliament.
Yeah, because the football regulator is the one that's...
Right, yes.
The one I was looking forward to going through, and now it's got lost. Go on, Paula.
Okay, so... Whoever folded this one up was very, very keen that this is like people that vote and fold their ballot paper lots of times. What is a spoiled ballot? So Victoria referred to spoiled ballot in an earlier version of the podcast. So when you go to vote, there's a list of candidates and a box, and you put your X next to the person that you want to vote for. Spoiled ballot is a ballot that can't be counted because it's been spoiled, and it could be for a number of reasons. It could be that it's just not clear who you wanted to vote for, so everybody looks at it and we can't tell. But the other reason is you've not voted for any candidate and you've written a slogan. Instead, you've written a message. A colleague of mine was at the counts for the recent local government elections, and there were quite a few spoiled ballot papers where people hadn't voted but had put something like peace in Gaza, you know, or ceasefire now. So a spoiled ballot paper, strictly speaking, is one that can't be counted because there's something wrong with it. But sometimes it's not that someone's made a mistake voting, it's that they've deliberately written that sort of slogan, like, you know, none of these people are good enough, you know, or I hate all of you. Those don't get counted in the totals, but they get shown to the candidates at the count. So people at the count can see how many spoiled ballot papers they are and what type they are.
We need to wrap up, so this is the end of the Election Explained series as well. Hopefully it's been useful, enjoyable, informative for people who stuck with it. I just wanted to ask you both to wrap up with a little bit of a, you know, why should you vote, Ben? If you've never voted before and this is your first time and you're not sure whether you should or you shouldn't, why should you?
Well, I think it's been said in the previous sorts of episodes and even in this episode. Obviously, you know, people fought and died for the vote. If you look at history, a vote isn't a natural right that we've had all of our existence. And the fact that people have fought for it, died for it, means that it's something we should not take for granted. Even if you're not particularly enthused by any of the candidates or any of the parties, there's something about being a good citizen, civic participation, and engaging with the process. And that is as important as actually being as enthusiastic for one particular party. So participation is a positive form of citizenship, and it's a sign of a healthy democracy.
Paula?
Yeah, so it is a sort of, I see it as a duty to vote. It's, you know, we should all be taking part in this. And it's, what's sad for me is that more people my age will turn out to vote as a percentage than younger people. And that's wrong. Decisions should be made by, you know, the whole of population, not just older people. So it's important to have your say, particularly for women. It's not that long ago that women couldn't vote. The right to vote is really, really important. And there are parts of the world where the right to vote is under threat. We want to demonstrate support for the right to vote by seeing huge numbers of people coming out and exercising that right. So, you know, whether you're a postal voter or in person, you know what to do.
OK, thank you very much, Paula. Thank you very much, Ben. Thanks to Victoria in the previous episode. And thanks to everyone in the studio, too, for making this happen. That has been Elections Explained. Hope you enjoyed it.